A French general lay dying in 1812, an arrow buried in his chest. Not a bullet, an arrow. In the age of cannons and muskets, everyone says Russia's snow defeated Napoleon. That story is incomplete. The real weapon was a horseman with a bow, riding out of Kazakh steppes. In the next 30 minutes, you'll see Napoleon's army break under arrows. You'll learn why French soldiers nicknamed these riders Cupids of the North. You'll see how a wounded soldier reached Paris on a Kazakh-manned horse. You'll discover why Goethe himself begged a steppe warrior for his bow. This isn't a textbook story. Most history channels skip this entirely. Napoleon called them amusing. Then his own men started dying. One French officer said they attacked like a swarm of wasps. These weren't Napoleon's enemies at Borodino. They were the ones after. The chase through Russia's snow was not led by regular soldiers. It was led by nomadic horsemen using tactics from Genghis Khan's era. 30 irregular cavalry regiments rode out of the Orenburg region alone. Kazakh volunteers filled Bashkir ranks, disguised in someone else's uniform. 2 of them rode all the way to the gates of Paris. Their names survive in old Cossack songs, half forgotten for 2 centuries. By the end, this video will change how you see 1812. You'll understand why a composite bow outperformed a musket at close range. You'll see the exact battle where cuirassier armor failed against arrows. You'll learn the terrifying trick used to force Paris to surrender. Stick around, because the ending involves blood, camels, and total panic. This is not generic history. Every claim here is document verified. French memoirs, Kazakh archives, and battlefield reports all confirm this. If you think you know how Napoleon fell, you're about to be wrong. The Grande Armée marched into Russia 600,000 strong. It limped out with a fraction of that number remaining. Steppe riders were a major reason for that collapse. Let's go back to 1812, where this forgotten war truly began. Napoleon invaded Russia in June 1812 with over 600,000 soldiers. He expected a fast, decisive war, forcing Tsar Alexander to surrender. Russia had no army large enough to match him head-on. So Russia called on people the West had never taken seriously. Nomadic warriors from the Ural and Kazakh steppe regions answered. Over 30 irregular cavalry regiments assembled from the Orenburg region alone. 15 were Bashkir regiments, filled quietly with Kazakh volunteers. Kazakh riders were folded into Bashkir units under imperial policy. Between 1799 and 1815, over 1,200 Kazakhs were officially registered as Bashkirs. This reclassification came from land shortages and harsh economic pressure. Once registered, all were required to serve in Cossack cavalry regiments. Many Kazakhs also volunteered directly for local militia forces. Historian P. Matveevsky called their participation in this war indisputable. One respected Cossack, Yakov Belyakov, was a baptized Kazakh warrior. His story was preserved in songs sung by Orenburg Cossacks. 2 Kazakh men from the Tama tribe are especially notable. Ayman Baybatirov and Narinbay Zhenzigitov served in a Bashkir cavalry regiment. Both men rode with that regiment all the way to Paris. Their journey covered thousands of kilometers across a war-torn continent. These weren't professional soldiers. Many were volunteers, not conscripts. They brought their own horses, bows, and centuries of steppe skill. Western armies used muskets, bayonets, and rigid marching formations. Steppe cavalry used speed, distance, and constant unpredictable movement. This difference in fighting style would soon terrify the French. Alongside Kazakhs rode Bashkirs, Kalmyks, Tatars, and Ural Cossacks. Together, these units formed a chaotic, mobile wall around Napoleon's army. The Russian regular army numbered far fewer than Napoleon's forces. Without irregular cavalry, Russia's defense strategy would have collapsed early. These horsemen filled a gap regular infantry simply could not cover. They scouted terrain, ambushed patrols, and disrupted enemy supply lines. Napoleon's officers initially underestimated these primitive-looking cavalry units. That underestimation would cost French soldiers their lives repeatedly. The steppe warriors carried composite bows, a weapon Europe had abandoned. Bows seemed ancient next to French muskets and modern artillery. But ancient did not mean weak, as French soldiers soon learned. A skilled horse archer could fire multiple arrows per minute. Muskets of that era took far longer to reload manually. In fast, close skirmishes, this speed advantage proved deadly effective. French soldiers were trained for organized battles, not chaotic ambushes. Steppe cavalry specialized in exactly the tactics European armies feared most. This was guerrilla warfare centuries before the term became common. Napoleon's army was built for open-field, disciplined confrontation. It was not built to fight riders who vanished after striking. The Orenburg regiments knew this landscape better than any French scout. They understood Russian winters, forests, and river crossings intimately. This local knowledge became a weapon as powerful as any arrow. Napoleon's campaign plan never accounted for this hidden cavalry force. Within months, that oversight would haunt his entire invasion. The stage was set for one of history's strangest military clashes. By 1812, most European armies considered the bow completely obsolete. Gunpowder had replaced bows across nearly every Western battlefield. Steppe warriors never abandoned the composite bow, and here's why. A composite bow was light, powerful, and deadly accurate on horseback. Reloading a musket required stopping, standing still, and precise timing. A horse archer could fire while riding at full gallop. This mobility let them strike and retreat before French muskets responded. French dragoons often couldn't even locate their attackers in time. Composite bows were made from horn wood and sinew layers. This construction stored enormous energy despite the bow's compact size. An arrow from these bows could pierce lighter armor plating. At close range, arrows matched or exceeded musket ball damage. Range mattered less than surprise, speed, and constant repositioning. Steppe riders trained with bows from early childhood, not adulthood. This lifelong training created accuracy French recruits couldn't match quickly. French General Baron de Marbot described facing this cavalry directly. He said they attacked like a swarm of wasps endlessly. Marbot admitted being wounded by what he called a funny bullet. That funny bullet was an arrow, not gunpowder ammunition at all. He recorded that one French officer was shot through the chest. That officer, a Legion of Honor member, died almost instantly. Napoleon reportedly found the bow-wielding riders amusing at first. He asked Marbot to capture some so he could see them. Marbot ambushed a group, capturing 30 and killing many more. Napoleon rewarded Marbot with a baron's title for this raid. The amusement faded fast as casualties from arrows kept rising. French soldiers soon realized these primitive weapons were genuinely lethal. Unlike muskets, arrows made almost no noise or muzzle flash. This silence made ambushes nearly impossible to predict or prevent. Horses carrying archers could cross terrain wagons and cannons couldn't. Rivers, forests, and open steppe all favored this mobile cavalry style. Napoleon's supply lines stretched across hostile, unfamiliar Russian territory. Steppe archers targeted these vulnerable supply routes relentlessly and repeatedly. Every disrupted wagon meant fewer supplies reaching frontline French troops. This wasn't glamorous warfare, but it slowly strangled Napoleon's army. Regular Cossacks fought alongside these archers using lances and sabers. Together, this combined cavalry created a nightmare for French officers. French memoirs from this period repeatedly mention fear of ambush. That psychological toll mattered as much as physical arrow wounds. Soldiers exhausted from marching couldn't relax, even during quiet moments. Constant threat of sudden attack wore down French morale steadily. Napoleon's Grande Armée began the invasion supremely confident and organized. By autumn 1812, that confidence was cracking under relentless harassment. The bow, dismissed as ancient, was rewriting modern battlefield rules. This wasn't nostalgia. It was tactical brilliance disguised as tradition. Steppe cavalry proved technology alone doesn't decide who wins wars. Next, we'll see exactly where this tactic drew first blood. Napoleon captured Moscow in September 1812, expecting Russian surrender soon. The surrender never came. Instead, Moscow burned around his army. With winter approaching, Napoleon made the fatal choice to retreat. That retreat became one of history's most catastrophic military disasters. Steppe cavalry, including Kazakh riders, shadowed the retreating French constantly. On November 5, 1812, near the village of Krasnoye, a French general fell. Surgeons expected a bullet wound, given his high military rank. Instead, they found an arrow shaft still lodged in his body. This wasn't an isolated incident during the brutal retreat westward. Steppe cavalry attacked exhausted, freezing French columns again and again. French soldiers already weakened by hunger faced sudden cavalry raids. Horse archers could strike columns and disappear before reinforcements arrived. This hit-and-run pattern repeated across hundreds of kilometers of retreat. Regular Cossacks joined these attacks, using lances against fleeing soldiers. The combination proved devastating for an already collapsing French force. Napoleon's army entered Russia with roughly 600,000 combined troops. By the retreat's end, only a small fraction remained combat-ready. Historians debate exact numbers, but losses were catastrophic by any count. Cold, starvation, and disease killed thousands during the retreat alone. Constant cavalry harassment prevented any real rest or recovery. Soldiers couldn't forage safely with archers watching from tree lines. Every stop to rest risked a sudden silent arrow attack. This psychological pressure compounded the physical suffering of freezing troops. French accounts from this period describe near-constant paranoia and dread. Soldiers reported seeing horsemen appear and vanish like ghosts repeatedly. Steppe cavalry knew this terrain far better than any French scout. They used frozen rivers, forests, and open plains to their advantage. Napoleon's disciplined formations meant little in this chaotic guerrilla environment. His army was built for European battlefields, not steppe warfare. The Berezina River crossing became one retreat's most desperate moments. Cavalry units pressed the French, even during this chaotic crossing. Thousands of soldiers never made it across that freezing river. Kazakh and Bashkir riders were present throughout this brutal chase. Their bows worked even when frozen muskets failed French soldiers. Gunpowder could become unreliable in extreme cold, unlike a bow. This gave steppe archers a functional advantage in winter conditions. French memoirs rarely credit these riders directly, often dismissing them. Russian accounts from Barclay and other commanders mention them sparingly too. Yet Kazakh and Bashkir participation is documented in regimental records. Regional archives from Orenburg preserve names, units, and battle locations. This isn't speculation, it's paper trail history often left untold. The retreat from Moscow destroyed the myth of French invincibility. Steppe cavalry played a direct documented role in that destruction. Winter gets credited as Napoleon's defeat in most popular retellings. Winter alone doesn't explain constant ambush and arrow wounds, though. Human tactics, not just temperature, broke this legendary army apart. Krasnoy became a symbol of how far the Grande Armée had fallen. A general shot by an arrow captured that fall perfectly. The chase, however, was far from finished after this retreat. The nickname Northern Cupids spread quickly through French military ranks. French soldiers used it to mock the archers' seemingly outdated weapons. Beneath the mockery, genuine fear was steadily building among troops. Baron de Marbot wrote extensively about facing these horse archers. He called them semi-barbarous Asiatics, revealing deep cultural bias. That bias didn't stop them from inflicting real, lasting damage. Marbot questioned why Russia spent resources deploying primitive cavalry units. His own writing then described their overwhelming, relentless attack style. He noted they launched themselves in swarms against French positions. Early clashes saw many Bashkir and Kazakh riders repelled by gunfire. Muskets could still win direct open confrontations against light cavalry. But steppe riders rarely fought that way, favoring hit-and-run tactics. Their goal wasn't winning pitched battles through direct frontal assault. Their goal was exhausting, demoralizing, and slowly bleeding French forces. This strategy mirrors tactics used by Genghis Khan's armies centuries earlier. Steppe warfare traditions had survived largely unchanged across generations. French soldiers trained in European tactics found this approach bewildering. There was no clear battlefield, no obvious front line to defend. Danger could come from any direction, at almost any moment. This uncertainty created a slow psychological erosion among French troops. Soldiers described sleepless nights, constantly listening for approaching hoofbeats. Fear became a weapon as effective as any physical arrow. Napoleon himself reportedly found early encounters more curious than threatening. That perception shifted dramatically as casualty reports kept increasing steadily. The bow silence made it particularly unsettling compared to gunfire. A gunshot warned nearby soldiers of danger in enemy location. An arrow often struck without warning, revealing nothing about the shooter. This silent lethality unsettled even hardened, experienced French veterans. French cultural assumptions painted these fighters as backward and harmless. Reality repeatedly contradicted that dismissive, prejudiced military assessment. Documented deaths and injuries proved these weapons were far from harmless. The Legion of Honor officer's death showed real elite-level casualties. Marbat's own wound proved even commanding officers weren't safe. Psychological warfare wasn't accidental. It emerged from actual battlefield effectiveness. Fear spread through French ranks faster than official casualty reports. Rumors about these Cupids likely exaggerated numbers and capabilities somewhat. Exaggeration itself became another weapon, amplifying dread before contact occurred. Soldiers expecting overwhelming numbers fought with reduced confidence and resolve. This mental toll weakened French effectiveness, even in unrelated engagements. Commanders had to account for constant flanking and rear threats. This forced defensive posturing, slowing the entire army's overall movement. Slower movement meant more exposure to Russia's brutal, punishing winter. Every tactical adjustment against steppe cavalry cost the French time. Time was the one resource Napoleon's retreating army couldn't afford. The Cupids' nickname, as mockery, became an ironic tribute. It acknowledged, however reluctantly, the impact these riders truly had. Historical records confirm this fear wasn't French propaganda or exaggeration alone. Multiple independent accounts describe similar experiences across different regiments. This consistency across sources strengthens the historical reliability of these accounts. The psychological front, though invisible, proved as decisive as any battle. By 1813, the war had moved beyond Russia into German territory. Napoleon regrouped his forces, hoping to reverse his previous losses. The Battle of Leipzig became known as the Battle of Nations. It remains one of history's largest battles before the modern era. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers clashed across multiple brutal days. Steppe cavalry, including Kazakh riders within Bashkir units, fought here too. This battle tested whether their earlier tactics could scale up significantly. French cuirassiers wore heavy armor designed to stop musket balls. That armor left small gaps at joints, necks, and connection points. Steppe archers specifically targeted these narrow, exposed, vulnerable areas. Arrows fired at these gaps could bypass armor almost entirely. This tactic earned steppe riders a second, more respectful nickname eventually. French troops began calling them Oriental Cupids during this campaign. The shift in tone reflected growing respect mixed with continued fear. Cuirassiers, once considered nearly invulnerable, proved surprisingly vulnerable here. Steppe cavalry exploited this vulnerability with disciplined, patient precision. Riders would circle enemy formations for extended periods before attacking. This circling allowed them to identify weak points before committing. Once identified, coordinated volleys of arrows targeted those exact gaps. French infantry squares, normally strong against cavalry charges, faced new threats. Sustained arrow fire could weaken formations before infantry even engaged. Leipzig proved these tactics weren't limited to small-scale retreat harassment. They worked in massive, coordinated battles involving multiple national armies. Austrian, Prussian, and Russian forces all fought alongside these steppe units. This international battlefield showcased steppe cavalry to a much wider audience. European commanders from multiple nations witnessed these tactics firsthand here. Napoleon suffered a decisive defeat at Leipzig, forced to retreat further. This defeat marked a major turning point in the broader war. Steppe cavalry contributions, while often uncredited, factored into that outcome. Regimental records from Orenburg confirm participation in this specific campaign. Kazakh riders within Bashkir units continued serving throughout this later stage. Their journey had expanded far beyond Russia's original borders by now. Fighting in Germany meant facing more organized, disciplined enemy formations. Despite this, steppe cavalry tactics remained effective against seasoned troops. The battlefield had changed, but the core strategy stayed remarkably consistent. Speed, surprise, and precision continued outperforming rigid European formations. Leipzig's scale meant casualties on both sides reached staggering numbers. Steppe cavalry losses aren't always separately recorded in surviving documents. This gap in records makes their full contribution harder to quantify precisely. What survives are consistent mentions across multiple independent wartime accounts. These accounts, French and Russian alike, confirm steppe cavalry's continued relevance. After Leipzig, Napoleon's path toward final defeat became increasingly clear. His remaining forces retreated further west toward France's own borders. Steppe cavalry followed, continuing their now well-established harassment tactics. The war that began near Moscow was steadily approaching Paris itself. Few in 1812 could have predicted this remarkable, sweeping journey. Kazakh and Bashkir riders were about to enter Western Europe directly. Their presence there would leave an unexpected mark on local history. Leipzig wasn't the end. It was a devastating preview of what followed. By early 1814, Allied forces pushed steadily toward French territory itself. Steppe cavalry regiments advanced alongside regular Russian and Allied troops. Their reputation had spread far ahead of their actual arrival. Rumors about these fighters terrified civilians and soldiers alike. Napoleon's own retreating armies had spread exaggerated stories about them. These stories described near-supernatural ferocity and battlefield brutality. Russian command recognized this fear as a strategic psychological tool. Before the assault on Paris, Kalmyk cavalry prepared a deliberate display. Roughly 500 Kalmyk riders stripped to the waist for this display. They smeared their bodies with animal blood before advancing forward. Riding bareback, they approached Paris driving herds of baggage camels. Massive dust clouds rose around this deliberately terrifying formation. Paris's defenders watched this spectacle from the city's outer walls. The psychological effect proved immediate and completely overwhelming for defenders. Facing what looked like an ancient, blood-soaked horde, morale collapsed. The garrison surrendered unconditionally rather than face this advancing force. This wasn't purely theater. It built directly on real battlefield reputation. Months of documented arrow wounds gave the display genuine credibility. Fear works best when backed by real, demonstrated capability beforehand. Elsewhere, Kalmyk cavalry achieved remarkable direct combat success too. At Fère-Champenoise in 1814, they routed an entire French infantry square. Around 1,000 French soldiers and officers were captured in that clash. Bashkir riders fought alongside Kalmyks throughout this final campaign stretch. Their combined tactics continued confusing French forces even this late. Riders would circle enemy positions for hours before launching arrows. This patient, methodical approach often devastated unprepared enemy units. Kazakh volunteers within Bashkir regiments remained active throughout these battles. Their long journey from the Kazakh steppe now neared its endpoint. 2 Tama tribe warriors mentioned earlier finally reached Paris itself. Ayman Baybatirov and Narinbay Janzagidov completed an extraordinary continental journey. Few soldiers from any era have traveled such a vast distance. Their path stretched from Central Asian steppes to Western European capitals. In Germany, along the way, an unexpected cultural moment occurred too. The poet Goethe personally met Bashkir cavalry commanders during their march. Goethe was so impressed he requested a commander's bow and arrows. He reportedly kept and proudly displayed this gift for many years. This small moment shows how these warriors captured European imagination. They weren't just feared, they became objects of genuine curiosity. French artists later depicted Bashkir encampments near Paris in artwork. These depictions preserved a visual record of their unusual presence. Steppe cavalry camps became a striking, unfamiliar sight in Western Europe. Local populations had never witnessed anything resembling these military traditions. Paris, the heart of Napoleon's empire, now hosted Central Asian horsemen. This reversal would have seemed impossible at the war's 1812 start. Napoleon's empire, built on European dominance, fell partly to steppe tactics. The irony of this outcome rarely appears in mainstream historical retellings. Most textbooks focus on regular armies, generals, and famous battles only. This overlooks the irregular cavalry that shaped the war's actual course. Paris's fall marked the practical end of Napoleon's first reign. Steppe warriors, including Kazakh riders, stood present at that historic ending. After Napoleon's abdication, steppe cavalry regiments slowly returned home eastward. Their journey back covered the same vast distance traveled during war. Many returned to Orenburg, Bashkir cantons, and Kazakh steppe communities. Their stories, however, didn't always travel with the same visibility. Western history largely remembers Cossacks, generals, and Napoleon's dramatic downfall. Kazakh and Bashkir contributions received far less lasting historical attention. Regional Orenburg archives preserve detailed regimental records for future researchers. Historians like P. Medvedevsky worked to document this overlooked participation. Old Cossack songs from the Orenburg region still mention this war. Yakov Belyakov, the baptized Kazakh Cossack, appears in these preserved songs. Oral tradition preserved details that formal records sometimes overlooked entirely. Modern Kazakh historians have worked to reconstruct this forgotten chapter. E-history archives in Kazakhstan now document these soldiers' verified contributions. This represents ongoing efforts to reclaim overlooked national historical narratives. The northern Cupids nickname itself survives across multiple language traditions. Bashkir, Tatar, and Russian sources all preserve versions of this name. Wikimedia and academic archives now catalog related historical cavalry imagery. French memoirs, despite their bias, remain valuable primary historical sources. Marbot's writings, while self-promoting, confirm real battlefield encounters occurred. Cross-referencing French and Russian accounts strengthens overall historical reliability. Monuments in places like Wies in Netherlands commemorate Bashkir cavalry presence. A sculpture there depicts a mounted Bashkir horseman from this campaign. These riders helped build strategic infrastructure like ship bridges during advances. Their engineering contributions extended beyond pure combat throughout the campaign. This broader involvement rarely appears in popular historical summaries today. The composite bow's battlefield success challenges assumptions about military technology. Advanced weaponry doesn't always guarantee advantage over skilled traditional tactics. This lesson extends far beyond the Napoleonic era into modern conflicts. Guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and mobility remain relevant military concepts today. Kazakh and Bashkir cavalry demonstrated these principles centuries before modern terminology. Their story connects ancient steppe warfare traditions to European military history. It bridges Central Asian heritage with pivotal moments in Western history. This connection deserves far more recognition than it typically receives. Historical narratives often simplify complex wars into single dominant explanations. Russian winter defeated Napoleon is simple, memorable, and genuinely incomplete. Human tactics, courage, and cultural traditions shaped this outcome significantly too. Kazakh warriors within Bashkir regiments were part of that shaping force. Their bows, discipline, and endurance helped grind down a legendary army. This chapter deserves a permanent place in how we teach 1812. Now, let's bring everything together and understand why this truly matters. So no, Kazakh warriors didn't defeat Napoleon completely on their own. The truth is more interesting and far more historically accurate. Kazakh riders, inside Bashkir and Cossack regiments, helped break his army. From Krasnoy's frozen fields to the gates of Paris itself. Composite bows outmaneuvered muskets in ways textbooks rarely explain properly. French generals died from arrows, not just cannon fire or bullets. A primitive weapon proved devastatingly modern in the right hands. Fear itself became a weapon, deliberately used to end a siege. 2 Kazakh warriors from the Tama tribe reached Paris personally. Their names survive today because someone chose to write them down. Goethe kept a bow as a treasured gift from a commander. That small object connects German literature to Kazakh military history. This war wasn't decided by one factor, one battle, or one myth. Winter mattered. Strategy mattered. But so did these forgotten riders. History often remembers generals while forgetting the soldiers who enabled them. Kazakh and Bashkir cavalry deserve recognition beyond a passing historical footnote. Their tactics predicted guerrilla warfare studied by militaries centuries later. Their courage crossed a continent most soldiers never dreamed of seeing. If this surprised you, imagine how much more history hides similarly. Textbooks simplify. Real history is messier, richer, and far more human. This channel exists to uncover exactly these overlooked, verified stories. Every claim here traces back to documented historical sources and archives. Not speculation. Not exaggeration, just history that got buried too long. If you learned something new today, that's exactly the point. Comment below which detail shocked you the most while watching. Was it the arrow wound, the blood-smeared cavalry, or Goethe's bow? Subscribe if you want more forgotten stories brought back to light. History isn't just kings and generals. It's warriors like these too. Kazakh horsemen rode into Paris and then rode quietly into obscurity. Today that obscurity ends. Thanks for watching until the very last line.